All right, so welcome back. So this is a Bible study that's going to talk about the biblical significance of the almond. And the almond, yes, it's the nut almond, but it's going to be talking about the significance of it biblically. Now we know in the Hebrew language, it's very vibrant, it's very lively, it's very metaphoric, a lot of similes, a lot of wordplay with certain things. In the same way in Songs of Solomon, the way that Solomon describes loving his wife is like taking care of a garden and enjoying her in a romantic way. It's like enjoying a ripe fruit. The same way the fruit was described as the pleasure of loving a woman. They had different metaphors of certain fruits and plants and trees to describe different parts of the body. So the Bible also has something about that with the almond. So we're going to get into this. We're going to actually get into a couple topics in regards to trees and other um, things in nature that describe the human body. So let's go straight into it. All right. So the almond. Oh, so the almond. Oh, my bad. So the almond. Just talking about when does it bloom? It blooms in between mid-February and mid-March. An almond tree buds burst into beautiful white and light pink blooms. During this time, beekeepers bring hives into the orchards to help pollinate the crop. So that's something that's unique about the almond is that in other fruits and vegetables, you harvest it in the fall time. The almond, you actually harvest it in the winter. So during the winter time, no, this is actually growing. That's something about the almond during the period of time where things are kind of hibernating in nature. The almond is actually growing and getting ready to bud for the new season. So it's always has a biblical significance about the new season or the new year. This also talks about it. Almond are the members of the rose family and are sometimes called the quote unquote queen of the rose family. Almond trees flower early in the spring, making them a symbol of new life. In the Hebrew Bible, the almond was a symbol of watchfulness and promise due to its early flowering. So again, this is a plant that blossomed at a time where it was the symbol of new life, it's new springtime. So that's different than the majority of plants. All right, so now let's go into the first time we actually hear about the almond. All right, so this is Jacob's dream. This Genesis chapter 28. This is after Jacob got the blessing from his father Isaac, and he tricked his father Isaac to give him the blessing as he pretended to be like Esau, and now he had to run away from home. And Isaac sent him to went to go live with his uncle, where he was going to find his wife or his wives Rachel and Leah. All right, so this is verse 10. Jacob's on the way to Padaram. And so he went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place. So he sat on a certain place and tarried there all night because the sun was set, and he took all the stones of that place and put them for his pillows and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. So Jacob had a vision of these angels coming up and down from heaven that was seen as a ladder. So keep going, verse 13. And behold, the Lord of the Most High stood above it and said, I am the Lord, or Jehovah, God of Abraham, your father, the God of Isaac. The land where thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. So he said, I'm going to give you this land that I promised to Abraham and to Isaac. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth. Thou shalt spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And in thee and thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And now remember we talked about this a few weeks ago about how that promise to Abraham is being passed to Isaac, now to Jacob, and now to his descendants. Right. Verse 15, and behold, I am with thee and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, and I will not leave thee, until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. And Jacob awakened out of his sleep and said, surely the Lord or the Most High is in this place, and I knew it not. Verse 17, and he was afraid and said, how dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. I'm emphasizing that he has came to the deduction that since he got this vision from the Most High at this place, he's saying that this is the house of God. This is a gate. This is like a portal to heaven. This is the way that I can communicate with the angels of the Most High in this location. So Jacob rose up early in the morning. He took the stone that he had put for his pillows and set it up for a pillar and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of the city was called Luz at the first. And Bethel means the house of God. We're going to talk about that. And Luz means the almond. We're going to talk about that. And Jacob vowed a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Most High, the Lord, be my God. And this stone, which I have set for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee. So this is one of the first instances we see about tithing. I think the first instance was Abraham and Melchizedek when he gave a 10th of what he had to Melchizedek. But this is another instance about giving a 10th of what you have. But this also talks about how right now the standards and the propriety of worship the Most High hasn't really been established, because there's some things that Jacob's doing that is not necessarily how to properly interact with the Most High, like, kind of, making these vows and, kind of making that this is going to be the house of the Most High. Like, there are some things that are still being worked out in regards to the whole regulations on how things are supposed to be stipulated with, Jacob and his descendants. And that's when the law of Moses kind of brings everything together. But you could tell right here, things aren't really as a standard yet. But let's go into these definitions of the word Bethel and Luz, because this is what's going to talk about with this Bible study. So the word Bethel, where Jacob renamed this city, it literally means house of God. It was the ancient place and seat of worship in Ephraim on the border of Benjamin, identified with Luz, the former name. All right. Now, Luz equals almond tree, the early name of Bethel, probably the name of the town in close proximity to the actual location of the altar and pillar of Jacob. Now, I mentioned this. I want to go into the definition of those words because Bethel means the house of God. Even before Jacob was there, that place meant almond tree. So Jacob, he understood who, the God was of the world, but other cultures, they used to name it the almond tree because they understood there was a spiritual significance there, but they had a different interpretation of that spiritual deity. So, but the almond has always represented some type of spiritual presence. It's always had a spiritual nature, the almond. That's why we just said that the almond blooms in the springtime. It was always a spiritual thing. So just how like people worship Mother Nature, they always say like, it's like, Earth Day is like, Groundhog's Day, Mother's Nature is going to come about. They worship Mother Nature even at that time, quote unquote Mother Nature. And they called it, certain things. The almond tree was it's like almost like a deification of that plant or that seed, that it was a spiritual seed. It was a spiritual thing, to see almonds. That means that you probably were blessed. So, they always had the spiritual implication with the word almond or the seed almond. That's why it was called Luz. But even in the Bible, the almond has a spiritual significance from the biblical perspective as well as from the ancient pagan perspective. So let's go into the etymology of the word almond. So almond, Middle English from Old French, Almond, from medieval Latin, amadula, in Greek, amugdale. So amugdale, if you know some neuroanatomy, you actually know that amygdala is actually where we get the word amygdala. The amygdala, that's part of the brain that deals with the flight and uh, uh, flight or flight response. The oh, oh, like your fear fight or flight response, or you kind of like the emotional perspective, things like that. But amygdala, uh late Middle English via Latin from Greek amygdala, almond. So amygdala was called the almond, even at that time, because even when they did their own anatomy, when they saw the brain, they said this part of the brain looks like an almond. Even at that time. So they always understood that this almond always had a significance in regards to like your connection to a spiritual entity. All right. Oh, my bad. In these pop-ups. All right. So this is the limbic system. So the limbic system is the part of the brain that involves the behavioral, emotional responses, especially when it comes to behaviors we need for survival. So it's like feeding, reproduction, caring for our young, and the fight or flight response. And you see right here, this is the amygdaloid body, or the amygdala. We have two of them on both sides of our brains at the border or at the start of the hippocampus right here. So with all this, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the pineal gland, the fornix, they all make up the limbic system. And people know about the pineal gland. That's where people get like the third eye reference, like your inner eye. Talk about your spiritual eye. They talk about your pineal gland, but that's really just talking about the whole limbic system, because the limbic system is the part of our brain that allows us to have these religious experiences, or this ecstasy experience, where we have this these thoughts of grandeur, or even these thoughts of seeing visions and near death experiences, things like that. That's all related to the limbic system. So that's why people can consider this almost like our connection to the Most High. This is our religious system. This is what makes people believe in spirituality, the limbic system, almost the emotional center of our brains, and also the sexual pleasure of our brains. This is all right here. So let's get into a little detail about that. The limbic system and the soul, evolution, and the neuroanatomy of religious experiences. So this is the article that came out in 2003. I'm just going to read the abstract of it. So it says the evolutionary neurological foundations of religious experience are detailed. Human beings have been burying and preparing their dead for the hereafter for more than 100,000 years. These behaviors and beliefs are related to activation of the amygdala, hippocampus, and temporal lobe, which are responsible for religious, spiritual, and mystical trance-like states, dreaming, astral projection, near-death and out-of-body experiences, and the hallucination of ghosts, demons, angels, and gods. Abraham, Moses, Muhammad, and Jesus Christ and others have communed with angels or gods display limbic system hyperactivity, whereas patients report religious hallucinations or out-of-body experiences when limbic structures are stimulated or excessively activated. It is postulated that limbic and temporal lobe structures account for the sexual and violent aspects of religious behavior, and also serve as a quote-unquote transmitter to God, and that the evolution of these structures made spiritual experience possible. So this is the scientist's explanations, or one of his explanations, of how to kind of explain away religious thoughts. But they have pinpointed that the limbic system is that part of the brain that expresses those religious episodes, or those ecstasy episodes, and they described it as the quote unquote transmitter to God. This is the way that you connect to the Most High. All right. Now, this is another article came out 2008. It's called Neurotheology. Are we hardwired for God? I'm just going to read a couple excerpts of this article by Renee J. Mueller, PhD. So among the limbic structures that have been associated with religious belief, the most frequently credited are the hypothalamus, amygdala. Remember, the amygdala is the almond, hippocampus. Neurotheologians point to the changes in functional MR scans in these areas as research subjects engaged in religious meditation. They reason that if thinking about God changes the way the brain works, there must be some inherent neural imperative to believe in God in the first place. In making this connection, neurotheologians are following the lead of neuroscientists who claim that changes seen in functional brain scans in persons who are happy, depressed, or obsessed demonstrate that these phenomena are brain driven. All right, so they're saying the same thing, that the reason why we have these expressive of emotions is all related to, the limbic system of our brain. Neurotheologians argue that the structure and function of the human brain predispose us to believe in God. They claim that the site of God's biological substrate is the limbic system deep within the brain, which has long been considered to be the biologic center for emotion. Ron Joseph, a prominent neurotheologian, goes a step further to suggest that the limbic system is dotted with quote unquote God neurons and quote unquote God neurotransmitters. Now, of course, there's no way to prove that we have a certain button that connects us to God, but the fact that these neurotheologians, basically scientists who actually believe in God, they call or they neuroscientists that believe in God, they have come with the conclusion that the limbic system is the closest thing that we have to a God neuron or nerve cells that connect us to the higher power, that have spiritual spiritual processes that make us have a belief in a higher power. So again, it's the same picture of the brain. This is half the brain. This is the limbic system with the amygdala and the hippocampus and the thalamus and hypothalamus. Now, this one right here, I want to focus on the pineal gland. Just want to go on a little tangent about it because, you may have heard about this in New Age spirituality and people talking about their third eye. I just want to talk about the history of the pineal gland, how it's connected to the limbic system, and really where we get this whole thought of the third eye and things like that, because this will help explain some things, hopefully. So the pineal gland is the etymology of that late 17th century, from French pineal, from Latin pinea, pine cone. The anatomical term refers to the shape of the gland. So again, not just in the 17th century, but even the ancients, they saw, when they did their dissections and anatomy of the brain, they saw the pine cone, they saw that part of the brain, they said, or they saw that the pineal gland, they said, this looks like a pine cone. And that's always been associated, even in the ancient time, they always refer to the pine cone as a source of spirituality, as well as the almond, because that was also kind of metaphorically a way to describe that this person is divine, that they had the almond, they had the pine, they had the pine cone, which was always depicted in, especially in Asian culture, especially the Asian gods like the Buddha, always had the picture of the head structure, basically an afro with a design that was shaped like a pine cone. If you see it right here, you see that this is a depiction of the Buddha with the beady hairs, which represents really naps. That's what we would call today, but really just coiled hair and, kind of coiled up in a bun, like a woman who wears a bun on her top of her head. That's just the same thing that they did in ancient time. And they've depicted this as a pine cone. So when someone has the pineal gland that's open, they just say that this is, in the ancient time, it was depicted as a pine cone. What we now see is like your pineal gland, but they saw it as the pine cone, which was all the same thing. But it's also depicting that these characters or these people, they always describe the people of those lands, whether it's like Thailand or Japan or India, the people who had this structure on their head, they were seen as deities or gods. And then, because when really a lot of the ancient people, especially the ancient Israelites who came to those lands, they were the gift of those lands. They were actually able to influence a lot of these people into uh, believing that they were special. They were the gift of mankind, and they actually led people further astray into paganism based off their belief that they were the chosen of the Most High, but they used their gift in order to lead people into more apostasy. That's why it's like, so the so-called black men and so-called black women, they were always depicted as gods to these other nations. And even today, they still understand that the so-called black man and so-called black women are gods in regards to their uniqueness to the Most High, their connection to the Most High. But in the state of where we're in right now in captivity, they have to make us believe that we actually are, lesser than human second rate citizens, or second class citizens. But in ancient times, this always depicted the so-called black person as a god, especially among the nations, especially in Asian cultures. And we're gonna look at some pictures like that. Let me try to explain my point. So again, this is a depiction of a Asian god-like figure. I don't know if this is necessarily the Buddha, but this is in Central Java. It's 800 AD. This is near Indonesia, and it's in, again, you see the beady hairs shaped in a bun like a pine cone, and you see they chipped off the nose, but see that's an Aboriginal man. The same thing right here, the beady hair. This is another depiction of a statue of a Asian quote unquote god near Indonesia. And this is the same thing with the pine cone on top of the head. So this is symbolizing that this looks like a woman, or maybe a young man. But it looks like this person was, depicted as a god. This was one of their gods that they worship. This is a Hindu temple in Indonesia called Rambanan, which has a bunch of different inscriptions and statues on the base of the monument. And we're going to look at a couple of them. So this is one right here. You see that's the woman with the beady hairs. She's seen as what we would call today as a modern day afro, but at that time they would call this a pine cone. So as again, they depict their gods in these forms, these statues, and these cutouts in the stone. They're always depicted as so-called black men and women. And even at that time, even today, now a lot of these statues are being redone to look more what we would call modern day Asian. But at the time, all these statues looked at like this. They always depicted the so-called black men and so-called black woman as these things. And just because these figures were so-called black, that doesn't mean that they were righteous or any way. That's why it's like a lot of these people, when they found out a lot of these Aboriginal cultures or Aboriginal races were originated from so-called black people, they get almost this arrogance about themselves and their skin color. That doesn't mean that they were righteous. A reason that the flood came about was because these people, they believed that they had this God right power over these other nations, which led them to apostasy, which led to the flood. They were the reasons that caused the flood. It's not necessarily that they were righteous because of their skin tone, but the ancient gods that these pagan practices were established by these Aboriginal cultures, they always depicted their gods with these physical features. That's always been the case. These are the modern day Indonesians or the modern day Asians. This is how they look. That's what you see on TV. These are the Aboriginal or original Indonesian men, that the people you don't see on TV. This is how the original Asian man looked, believe it or not. But this is the original Asian man, especially Indonesian man. And again, you see the woolly hair. So, this is just how far the so-called black man or the so-called aboriginal man has become on this earth is, as the scriptures say, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, because it's all to fulfill prophecy. That's why it's like it's not necessarily about um, you know, what the media today tries to get so-called black people to think that it's about trying to be equal to the so-called Caucasian. It's not really not that is the case in regards to prophecy. It's really about retaining the rulership that you once had, but that has to come from inside you. That's nothing that you can really vote for or really try to march for. That's something that comes inside of you, and that only comes from repentance and humbling yourself to the Most High, so we can reestablish our people back in their proper order. But first, they have to go through a process of humility. All right. So now let's go back into the scripture, because it's going to also talk about some more about the almond, and then we're going to close it with another story about almonds. So this is Numbers chapter 17. I think we talked about this before in other Bible studies about bearing fruits, but this is verse 1. This is after the core of rebellion. So after the Israelites, they had a lot of fear of going to the promised land after the 12 spies went out, and Joshua and Caleb were the only two of the 12 spies that had a good report, and everybody else was scared to go into the promised land because they felt like they were like grasshoppers, and they had a lack of faith. The Most High promised that none of them would go into the promised land, and then Korah formed a rebellion to try to overturn Moses, and he was swallowed up into the whole of the earth, and so was his whole family and his household and everybody that followed Korah. So after this, a lot of the people are just all over the place. They're having a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. So the Most High does this thing where he's going to basically show that Aaron and Moses are the leaders of the camp, and y'all should listen to him. So let's go into the story. So verse 1, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, and take of every one of them a rod according to the house of their fathers, and all their princes according to the house of their fathers, 12 rods. Write thou every man's name upon his rod, and thou shalt write Aaron's name upon the rod of Levi. For one rod shall be at the head of the house of their fathers. So every tribe had a rod. So Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, and all the way down to Benjamin, they all had a rod, and Aaron was for Levi. All right, and thou shalt lay them up in the tabernacle of the congregation before the testimony, where I will meet with you, and it shall come to pass that the man's rod whom I shall choose shall blossom, and I will make to cease from me the murmurings of the children of Israel, whereby they murmur against you. All right, and Moses spake unto the children of Israel, and every one of their princes gave him a rod apiece, for each prince one according to their father's houses, even 12 rods, and the rod of Aaron was among their rods. And Moses laid up the rods before the Most High in the tabernacle of the witness. And it came to pass that on the morrow, Moses went into the tabernacle of the witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded, and brought forth buds and blossoms, and yielded almonds. All right. So, out of all those 12 rods for the 12 tribes, Levi's tribe blossomed with almonds. Again, we see this almond blossom. And remember, the almond was the sign of kind of the sign of new beginnings, new springtime. So this was a way that the Most High was saying that, we're going to start back again. And Aaron is still the person that I choose to be the leader, one of the head of the tribes. The Levites are going to be my priests that are going to lead people out. Because one of the issues Korah had was that Korah was upset with the sons of Levi, that the sons of Levi were deeming themselves as the leaders of the tribes. And he said, like, we should all be leaders of our own respective tribes. And so it's like, he formed a rebellion against the Levites because he felt like we should all have the opportunity to be priests. But this was the Most High's order, and again, he was reestablishing that order with this test, or really this miracle of Aaron's rod being the almond or Aaron's rod being the one that blossomed with almonds, to show that the Levites were his chosen people out of all the 12 tribes. Those were the ones that he was working through. All right, so verse 9, And Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord unto all the children of Israel, and they looked and took every man his rod. And the Most High said unto Moses, bring Aaron's rod again before the testimony, be quiet for a token against the rebels, and thou shalt quite take away their murmurings from me, and they die not. And Moses did so as the Lord commanded him, and so did he. And the children of Israel spake unto Moses, saying, behold, we die, we perish, we all perish. Well, whosoever cometh anything near the tabernacle of the Lord shall die, shall we be consumed with dying. So again, they were all afraid, they just lived in fear. They always were fearful. That's why they all perished in the wilderness, because they had no faith. But in general, that's why the Levites, they were the ones that were able to go into the tabernacle, because they were the chosen tribe for that job. Only the high priest could go into the tabernacle. Only the priest could go into the tabernacles, and the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, or to the Ark of the Covenant. All right. But yeah, that's that story. So again, we see that almond is used as a metaphor, as this is the one I choose, or this is the new beginning. I'm gonna start with the Levites as my people, or as the tribe that's gonna lead. All right, so now let's go to Hebrews chapter 9, verse 1. Now I'm just going to talk about the significance of the ark and what's inside the Ark of the Covenant. So verse 1, then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary. For there was a tabernacle made, the first wherein was the candlestick and the table and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the Holy of All. So in a temple, or in the tabernacle, before we had the temple, Solomon built the temple, you had an area where you would have the basics of the tabernacle, or the place where the priest would give the sacrifice. But inside there was a small room, where the very presence of the Most High was kept, and only the high priest could go there once a year, which was on the Day of Atonement. He could only go in there once a year. All right, and only he could go in there unless he would be killed, because it was so holy. That's why it was called the Holy of All, or other translations call it the Holy of Holies. All right, so inside the Holies of Holies, or the Holy of All, which had the golden censer, the Ark of the Covenant overlaid around with gold, where was the golden pot that had the manna. You remember the manna was the bread of heaven that came when they were in the wilderness. That's what, that fed them while they're in the wilderness for those 40 years. And Aaron's rod that budded, remember those almonds, that was inside the ark, and the tables of the covenant. So the 10 commandments, those were inside the ark. So you have the manna, which is basically the bread of life, or at least a metaphor of that, which was the Messiah, Christ. Aaron's rod, which had the almonds, and then the two tabernacle, or the two tables of covenants, which were the 10 commandments. And since this Ark of the Covenant is where the Most High dwelt, now that you are a temple, you're supposed to have this inside of you. You're supposed to have that bread of life inside of you, not just inside your belly, but also now inside your mind. Remember, the almond represents the amygdala. That's your brain. That's why you're supposed to, in the tables, the tabernacle, and the tables, and the covenant is supposed to be inside your heart. That's why we're supposed to love the Lord, our God, with all our heart and all our mind, and all our strength, but always with our mind and with our hearts. So we're supposed to love him emotionally and also logically, because he always knows what's best for us logically, and also just, emotionally, just like you love your significant other, or you love your parents. There are different ways to love people, of course, but the Most High wants us to love them with everything, not just, not just with I think this is the right choice because he's the smartest person, but it's also an emotional love. It's also a logical love, and intellectual love. It's also a strength love, a physical love, an action love. So it's like everything that's supposed to be inside that tabernacle or that ark is supposed to be now inside your heart and inside your brain. All right. And this is John chapter 7, verse 37. It's also going to correlate with it. And the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus, or Yahushua, stood and cried and saying, if any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believeth on me, as the scriptures has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. But this spake he of the Spirit, which they believed on him should receive. Because at the time, people were thinking that he was talking literal about, actually having water. And it's like, no, he was talking about the Holy Spirit. For the Holy Ghost was not yet given because that Jesus was not yet glorified. So, a lot of people, they were thinking of very carnally, but he was thinking spiritually. The whole book of John has a lot of metaphors about things like he's saying he's the light of the world, or, he's saying that, he's the life and the resurrection, saying a lot of things that were hidden on multiple layers, the physical part and the spiritual part, that a lot of people, they couldn't really understand until he was resurrected. But when we talk about the word belly, this is a Greek word meaning kalia. Now let's go into what that means, because he says, anyone who believes on him, his belly shall flow rivers of living water. So when it says the belly or the kalia, of course it means physically the whole belly, like the upper stomach, the lower belly, the womb where the fetus is conceived, the uterus of animals. But the fifth definition is what he was referring to, the innermost part of the man, the soul, the heart as the seat of thought, the feeling, the choice. Doesn't it sound like the limbic system? Your thought, your feeling, your choice, these seat of emotions. That's what he was referring to. Out of your brain, you're going to have this water flowing, living waters flowing through your body, because water has always been referred to as knowledge. The scriptures have always been described as living water, as flowing water. It's not never stagnant water, like a river. It's always flowing and it's always going, because you always learn something. That's why when you ever read the Bible, you learn something new, even if you read it 100 times, because it's always flowing. It's always active. It talks about the past, the present, and the future at the same time. Now, we're going to end it with this verse. It's the last thing we're going to talk about, almonds. So this is Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1. The title is Remember God in Your Youth. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. This is, in other words, this is saying that you should remember God or the Most High when things are going well for you, before things start to go bad. Because then if you humble yourself while you have good times, you're going to be able to endure better when the times get evil or more darker, like in the times that we're in right now. I mean, technically we've been in this time since Christ died and resurrected, but right now in our present time, our time, we're going into a darker time right now. So Solomon is saying you should humble yourself before it's too late. You shouldn't, shouldn't try to humble yourself to the Most High at the last minute, like, on your deathbed or when things are really going bad and you're like, oh man, I need to get myself right. No, you need to get yourself right now. All right, verse 2. While the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened, nor clouds return after the rain. So, the sun, remember when it says the sun, the moon, the stars, it always talks about the children of Israel. When Joseph had that dream in front of his brothers, he's like, the sun and the moon and the stars bow down to him. So that always refers to the Israel, the children of Israel, when they become darkened, but it's also just talking about just knowledge in general is just going to become darkened. It's going to be very hard to understand things that used to be kind of plain. It's going to be a little harder to find information in these dark times. The clouds return after the rain, so it's not going to be a lot of water. And as we just read in John, water always represents knowledge. So it's going to be kind of a drought of knowledge. It's going to be very hard to understand things. And when the days get darker. Verse 3, in the days when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look out the windows be darkened. So the keepers of the house, that's like, the leaders of the land. That's like the governor and the presidents and the prime ministers, the keepers of the house. They're going to be scared. They're going to be trembling. Strong men, the people that we think that are very strong, they're going to bow themselves. They're going to be scared as well. The grinders will cease. Like, workers, it's going to be hard to find like a productive job out here. It's going to be, very hard. Like, when you say you're working hard, I'm on my grind. The grind is going to cease. It's not going to be a lot of people working. And you look out your window, it's going to be dark, and it's going to be hard to have a good positive outlook on life. You're going to be kind of negative and depressed when things get darker. So that's what, Solomon's saying, don't wait until when these times happen to know your creator. All right. So verse 4, and the door shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low. He shall rise up at the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of the music shall be brought low. When you say you shall rise up to the voice of the bird, basically you're saying you will rise up when the birds get up. Like, you're not really going to have motivation to get up on your own. You're going to get up when the birds get up. They're going to be the ones that kind of make you have motivation to even get out of bed. The daughters of music shall be brought low. So it's like, music has always been a joyful thing, but it's going to be a time when the music is going to be sad and depressed and negative, kind of like how we are right now. A lot of the music that we hear today isn't really uplifting. It's about, getting over on people and, trying to scam people and trying to, manipulate people. It's not really about uplifting people. When you listen to like your aunts or your grandparents' music, back in the 70s and 60s and 50s, it was more about love and, overcoming. We don't really talk about that in our music nowadays. Verse 5, and when they shall be afraid of that which is high, fear shall be on the way. The almond tree shall flourish. So you see that the almond tree shall flourish in the midst of all this destruction. And that's also talking about the Most High unlocking a part of the people's brains that are able to see through a lot of the issues that we have. They're going to be awakened. As times get darker, the light is going to get brighter. And that's going to be the elect, or the people that the Most High has chosen to understand his word. That as times get darker, he's going to awaken people's minds. So that's the thing. That's the almond tree reference again. So in the middle of that, let me read that again. Also, when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fear shall be in the way, and the almond tree shall flourish, and the grasshopper shall be a burden, and desire shall fail. I'm talking about the grasshopper. That's as remember back in Egypt, in the plagues of Egypt, the grasshopper was the plague of famine, because the grasshopper ate all the crops. So that's going to be the famines that's going to come upon this world. And I mentioned this before with Jody. The grasshopper with the famine is not necessarily just a physical famine that we can see. Like, you go to the grocery store, you're not going to have food. It's sometimes, if we're eating genetically modified foods, we're in a famine. We just don't recognize it. We're not eating natural foods. That's why we get sick so often, because we're not eating things that are actually good for us to eat. We're in a famine even to this day. So it's like, that's what it's talking about. The grasshopper shall be a burden, and desire shall fail, because man goes to his long home, and the mourners go about the streets. When it says man goes to his long home, that's talking about the grave. That's talking about death. That's man's long home. And ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. So Solomon is warning people to not, try to think about God during these times, even though, that is a time where we're going to be thinking about God. But he said, don't wait until this time to do that. You need to think about the Most High when things are going well. Then he'll be more likely to help you when these times happen. All right. So that's it about the almond tree and the almonds. I have one video I want to talk about. This is a scientist who created a vaccine that can stop someone from believing in God. There was a video that was circulating a couple years ago, and I remember watching it, and I was like, this is very interesting. This is a video back in 2005 during the Iraqi war, and they said the scientists were Bill Gates. It's not Bill Gates actually on this video. There's some scientist who has created a vaccine that help people, or that I wouldn't say help, but it has helped people from stop people from having religious what he calls it fanaticism, basically to combat radical Islam. But it basically was able to inhibit people from believing in God. So let's take a look at it. It's not that long. Again, it says Bill Gates CIA brief, but